going on somewhere that's good.
Was not inspected, or if it was, he paid up the inspector off. We're like on our 15th project.
That was many years ago. Well before mine.
Our 15th project was years ago, and had that been inspected, it would have ever passed code. So it just makes me, and each one is kind of like that, but they just keep piling on, so.
I think it's pretty common a long time ago.
Well, this just happened, I mean, we've been here for 5 years, so it was just right before we got here. Yeah.
Usually people do work on Sundays.
Yeah. They were jackhammering our garage, the floor of our garage all morning this morning.
Oh, really? What are you doing?
Oh, we're just trying to have our plumbing work. Simple. There's another fault that they should have said, that they said today should have never, ever been, like a house should not have been.
Oh, that's why you're asking.
Well, it's that plus like, I mean, honestly, like 10 different other things that we got to do.
How old is the house?
It's 1967, but it was completely redone, I mean, remodeled, supposedly from the studs out, in 2017.
But the plumbing is going under the garage floor somehow?
Yeah, so, yeah, garage floor, that, failed to install a water heater in one of the buildings. It was just, like, we just had to have our whole entire upstairs bathroom redone because they put the tile right, they just glued the tile to the drywall. So it's just like one thing after another. It looked beautiful when we bought it, but,
Contractor's probably not around it
oh
anymore.
yeah, from the day that we moved in, we had one problem after another with this being the most recent. Yeah. What's going on next, Steve? What are you doing for the building?
They're doing a track one total remodel. But they haven't changed the footprint, so I asked Marty for the definition of track one versus track two, and they did it in track one, barely, but they're doing everything.
Wow.
Just changing the windows.
Yeah, just change the windows. So we got anybody online? Do we know?
Yeah, we have, looks like 3 people online. I'll be your secretary, but I'll get that.
Okay, our monitors aren't showing anybody. We don't have we just have a one.
Okay, Sebastian, can we get the Zoom up on the screen, please?
Okay, so good afternoon. We'll call the regular meeting for Monday, March 15th, 2023 to order. Can we have a call to order or can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Croman?
Here?
Board Member Dyer?
Here.
Board Member Goodhue?
Here.
Board Member Hall?
Here.
And Board Member Pomeroy.
Here.
Okay, and then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do we have any members of the public who are wishing to speak on any matters of concern? Anyone on Zoom wishing to speak? Okay, hearing none, we'll go forward with the announcements, please. Any announcements?
I can make one, I guess.
Please.
I'm not sure this is the right part of the agenda, but is that on? I just was going to announce the AIA Monterey Bay is having its final discussion and presentation on the housing series that we've been doing at Sandbox Sand City at 6 p.m. on Thursday, and it's going to be quite a broad range community forum and a lot of different people. I think Brandon and Marnie and Catherine are going to be there, and developers, housing advocates, and a lot of other people. So it should be a really great discussion. It's going to be, I'm going to moderate it with Justin Pauley. So if you're available, come on over.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, we'll move forward with the consent agenda. So the first item is the adoption of minutes for February 27th. Does anyone want to make a motion after reviewing the minutes to approve the minutes?
There was one thing I saw on the minutes about the map, and it was my motion. It should have also said there was concern about the map further deteriorating,
Mm-hmm.
and that was not in the minutes.
Was that in the minutes of this? So
That's
this
previous, I think.
Yeah, we continued that discussion, and I think we.
It was in the previous ones?
Yeah, well, I think that what happened is that we agreed that that was of historical significance, so we ended up moving forward with the
We
approval of
did,
that. Yeah.
we did, and there were 4 or 5 reasons, but the fact that it may deteriorate further
Okay.
was not one of them.
And that was a
Okay.
very important point.
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. So can we add that to the minutes? That's great. Thanks for catching that. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes?
I so moved.
Okay, with the amendment?
Second.
Excellent. Do we have a vote, please?
Board Member Croman,
Yep.
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
and Board Member Pomeroy.
Yes.
And then same thing for the minutes for March.
I'll move that we approve the March minutes.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Board Member Croman,
Yes.
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
and Board Member Pomeroy.
I was not here for the March meeting.
So Board Member Pomeroy is recusing herself from that vote. Thank you. Okay.
I'll approve them, but I wasn't there.
Okay. It's up to you. If you read
I
them,
did read them.
then you can vote on them.
Okay.
If you watch the video and you read the minutes, then you're allowed to vote on it.
They looked good. I'll approve.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so now we'll go to orders of business. First item is considering making the HRB meetings on-site only without further Zoom linkage. So any discussion on that?
I just have a brief presentation. If I could go ahead and share my screen. Thank you. So, as you all are aware, your meetings are governed by a set of rules of procedure that the board adopts. And pre-COVID, the rules of procedure and our practice was to meet on site at the very first project for the tour of inspection. Post-COVID, our procedures have changed. We no longer, I think I just said that backwards, didn't I? Let me start over. Pre-COVID, the board would meet in the chambers. We would convene the meeting, then we would depart the chambers, and we would go as a group on the tour of inspection. Post-COVID, we now meet on site at the first site on the tour. So staff is proposing that we update the rules of procedure to reflect the current practice, where we will continue to convene the meeting on site at the first project on the tour of inspection. And you can see here, this is the red line of how the rules of procedure would change. This is the only change staff is proposing. And again, it's just to align with our current practice. So we're just seeking your review and your approval.
I'm sorry, when I read through this, I thought also a part of it was that they would be held in person only. Is that, am I thinking about something that's not really true? Are we still gonna hold them online and in person?
We are.
Okay,
Yes, so this,
Sorry.
yeah, this does not change the format of the meeting,
Okay.
just where we convene the meeting, which is at the tour of inspection.
gotcha. So, any discussion on that?
I guess my only question is if people are late to the first one, how does that usually work? I guess if it's late, they're late for any meeting and they start to participate, they don't redo the roll call, but it's somehow noted?
It will be noted,
Yeah.
yes,
Isn't it just what we've been doing now?
correct,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yep. To me too.
Okay, so can we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, if I could, you may want to open it for public discussion.
Oh, okay, yep. So I'll open the agenda item for public discussion. Any comments from either the in-person or on Zoom public? Okay, we'll close that and bring it back to the meeting. Is there, anybody have a motion to approve or disapprove that?
I'll make the motion. I move we amend the Historic Resources Board Rules of Procedure to convene meetings on site at the location of the first item on the tour of inspection.
Second.
Perfect. Can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Croman,
Yes.
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall.
One question, what if we don't have anything to tour like today?
So, prior to each meeting, when we post the agenda will state if there's a tour of inspection, the time it will start, and it'll list the sites. And if there's no tour of inspection, then the agenda will state that we're meeting at 4 in the chambers.
Okay, I approve.
And Board Member Pomeroy. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And then the second agenda item is the proposal for a level 2 concepts. If we could cover that, that would be great.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a discussion of a proposed incentive program for non-historic homes. This is a proposal also known as Level 2 that was drafted by Board Member Carol Hall. And just by way of some background, at our December 2022 meeting, the board asked staff to bring forth a future agenda item to discuss saving non-historic homes from demolition or extensive exterior remodeling. Staff did put that item on the agenda in January of this year, and we discussed the original proposal, again authored by Board Member Hall. Following that discussion, Board Member Hall decided that some clarifications of some key points was warranted, and so on March 20th, we convened and had another discussion about the revised proposal. It was a very fruitful discussion and ended with the board recommending some additional revisions and then further discussion, which is why we're here this afternoon. So the proposal is included as an attachment to your staff report. I'm gonna let Board Member Hall go through the details of the revisions. But what we hope to accomplish here this afternoon is a review and discussion of the proposal. And then staff is looking for direction from the board on whether to take this to the City Council. And if so, the City Council will consider whether to proceed with a policy as well as provide direction to staff. And so with that, I will turn it over to Board Member Hall.
That's great. Just before we start, let's decide on rules of engagement. As Carol goes through this, do we want to bring up any comments or items that we have as she's going through them, or do we want to wait till the end? I think it might be more useful personally if we go through it as she hits that point, but I think we should all be in lockstep on how we do this. So any thoughts from anybody else?
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
I may wait till the end, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So
the revisions, let me just go through what happened since you saw the longer version, and I just cut it a lot shorter, kept a lot of the introduction, eliminated a lot of the introduction, actually. Also enhanced the incentive potentials, and that really, the incentives, of course, are up to the city council to decide what goes, what doesn't go. And the realization from our last discussion that a lot of whether people decide to provide level 2 for their home will depend on the incentives, which basically I think the Planning Commission with the Planning Department with the HRB would discuss on any individual case basis, any individual house basis. So also, of course, to make sure that it was stated over and over again that it was an incentive program, a voluntary program, not something that was required per se. And I think that was pretty much everything in terms of what was changed to what you had read in the longer version. I also added a checklist for use by the Planning Commission, Planning Department, and I have one issue at the top that I would ask for discussion on our part about. But A, B, C, D, and E, second to the last page, really, I hope, helps to define what goes to the HRB for discussion of whether something qualifies for level 2 or not, after the owner determines whether they would like to be a part of level 2. And let's see, I think that's about it. There were just little tweaks here and there, but I assume that you've all been able to read this just before the meeting today. I read it just before the meeting today again. And I would really like to entertain people's comments and feedback page by page, if that's, makes sense.
Sure.
I think, there was some question last time of how many people would participate in the level 2 program. I think it, once again, depends on what the council is willing to do in terms of incentives, and whether they're worth their while, basically. But also, I think it's has a positive message generally for the developers or the owner that we would like to keep our older stock if possible, period. Okay, so we can go through this page by page then if you have comments. All right, so starting with page 1.
Can I ask a question before we start? I was just wondering when public comment will happen.
Do you want to do that before we jump in? We can do that.
That's usually the case.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So, thanks for the reminder. So let's open it to the public, not the republic, the public, or the republic if anybody from Washington State or somewhere else is listening. Let's open it up to the public either in person or on Zoom. Any comments to this proposal?
Will we give them a chance afterwards too?
We can open it back
Yeah.
up if we.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm David O'Neill, and I'm restoring a historic home across the street from where I live. And we weren't sure if it was going to be historic or not, but if we had the opportunity to make it historic through the level 2 and have some benefits from that, that would have been great because it was our intention to save it anyway. So this could be really helpful to a number of citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from those on Zoom? Okay, hearing none, we'll close and go back to the board. So, Carol, you want us to go page by page?
Sure,
Okay.
if that's what everyone feels is worthwhile. All right, page 1, any comments? None. Page 2, which is qualifying characteristics for level 2 protection.
So I have a comment on there. You've kind of taken the old style homes But my thought is, shouldn't we widen the aperture to include more modern or prevalent styles? You know, I'm thinking like ranch style, or, you know, the cliff-made combined arts and craftsy type of style, or prairie, you know, prairie. I know you do, in the back there is a picture of prairie style, but, and also, you know, for the HRB, we have, you know, the 50-year mark is a rolling mark. So I don't see that it says built up through the 1940s, but like what happens 20 years from now? Are we still looking at only those homes built before the 40s, or would it be a rolling process like we do with historic homes now?
I suppose we could revise this at some point if we decided that that made sense.
I guess my bigger question is level 2 homes only aimed at those homes that are, you know, old style Carmelish, or is it really a HRB review light, a level 1 light, you know? So, and if it is, then it should cover, you know, more, you know, at some point it should cover houses built in the 70s and, you know, things like that, like our HRB process will at some point.
Well, at the time I wrote it, I was thinking of the older homes.
Sure.
Period. So I suppose in a few years when all of these things are looked at again, it'll depend on who's there and voting and all of that.
I don't see how we can separate it from the historic resources statement.
Yeah.
As far as what is designated as historic and should be.
That's why we said 50 years or,
I know, but in the style thing, you're pointing out details here when you're saying possible characteristics include. And that's pretty limiting. I mean, I haven't seen any hand-carved doors lately. And I think if you had a house that had hand-carved doors, it would already be historic.
Not true, mine does, and it's not historic.
Well,
Yeah.
leaded glass windows, you know, this kind of thing, and maybe your house has them too, but I think they're very rare. And I think what we need to say instead of this is just the styles that we sanction in the statement.
All right, well, that's another option, I suppose. Instead of going into this detail, just talk about styles.
To me, that would make more sense because it's already been done.
Yeah, I have another thought, but I guess I'll just wait till Carol gets through and then I'll.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm worried about losing our designation too, as a city that we have worked hard to get. If this comes out, because it's so uninclusive.
Okay, so,
Oh, I'm sorry, I turned the wrong one on.
You got it.
okay, so we should, I guess, discuss that more.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we can give Carol our notes too as we're going through this, so that she's not having to, you know, write everything down, would probably be helpful. If we have suggestions for, you know, the next draft or whatever. But honestly, Carol, also I should say before I started, I think, you know, this is laudable what you did. I know it's a lot of work and a lot of effort that went into it.
Yes.
And I really applaud you for doing it. And my intent today is not to, you know, chew up your product. It's just to work out some issues. And I think that's hopefully what we're all looking for.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so that was another thing that I had added, I think because Eric had made a comment about that, 50 years and older, to keep it consistent with historic designation as well. So this was kind of from before that, I guess you'd say. And that's why it also says possible characteristics include, doesn't exclude anything. I think it would be up to the Historic Resources Board to determine if something were worth, you know, making into a level 2. And that's also stated in here that nothing's in stone. A lot of this is gray. A lot of this requires discussion and judgment, as is the reason we have boards and committees. Otherwise, we wouldn't need them. Okay, so moving on to the next page. It just continues on with the types of buildings that could be potentially considered. Table 1, page 4. And you've seen this before. Nothing has changed, I don't believe, on this. What the historic requirements are, which I call level 1 versus level 2 homes, and it's much less restrictive in terms of what you can do with the house than our historic requirements are.
And my comment on that was, I mean, I understand the intent, but there's so few requirements or guidelines, you know, that almost the selection of homes becomes completely arbitrary. You know, and I know the intent is to be less restrictive than level 1 homes, but I think we've got to have, other than the age and, you know, some characteristics and things like that, that's the only requirements. And so I think if we're going to make this an enduring process, there's got to be something else that it's got to be done, unless the answer is we have it assessed by, you know, one of the experts that we use for historic homes, and they either say this is it's a example of this style or not this style, and then we just take it under advisement. But it seems like I know we want to be more hands-off on these homes, but it seems like there's almost no, you know, there's no guidelines. So I could say my house is a classic 1960s house because it's just a box or something like that. And I don't know if that's the right answer or not the right answer.
I think we need to preserve things that were built through the history of the town, whether they're something that we like or whatever. I mean, because it was built here, this is what people wanted at the time. And it's a piece of history. I love Pacific Grove because you can drive in that town and you can see houses from all periods. Sure, they have gorgeous Victorians, but they also have some modern houses, maybe not that many, and there aren't really that many in this town either. I think this is an historic resources board. I think we need to protect our historic properties.
I think though, like if you look at parts of Palo Alto, it is exactly what wrong looks like.
Yeah.
There's all these cute little bungalows, and then there's some, you know, 3-story, regardless of the style, that just doesn't fit in the neighborhood at all.
Sure,
It doesn't fit on the plot. And, you know, then there's 4 more nice houses, and there's 2 more ultra modern or whatever houses. And, you know, where, you know, obviously they determine that people have the right to do that. It really, I mean, it just demolishes the character of some of those beautiful neighborhoods.
It does too, and part of this, I mean, I realize it's not part of this proposal, but I'm concerned about the quality of the street. You know, what taking down a house would do if you put up the kind of house that doesn't fit. And I like the footprint idea that Pacific Grove has, but this is a whole different topic. So, but I'm so concerned when I walk in town about, you know, the houses that are there, and you see that and you think, oh my gosh, that was probably built about 1952, you know, but there's nothing stopping somebody from taking it down. It's sitting on a big lot with a separate garage, and it'll go. And that's the kind of house that you know, it's a vernacular house, you know, stucco house with metal windows, kind of house they built then.
I think this is, as we go through it, there's a lot of things that come to mind that probably should be looked at in terms of eligibility for it. And a lot of those probably are not exactly attuned to historic preservation law or historic preservation ordinances. And that's not a necessarily bad thing. That's just the fact we may want a broader view of it to analyze it and evaluate it. And I'm curious actually what staff thinks about a development of this type of ordinance and calling it a historic level 2, and how that relates back just in terms of legal language to historic preservation law, et cetera. You don't have to answer that right away. I know that's a complex question, but it seems to me that this, if we're going to do this, it may need to be almost separate. I mean, you can call it historic. Simply use the word historic, i.e. old, and reflecting, you know, the older character of Carmel, but tying it into all the historic preservation law is another thing.
And by separate, what do you mean? just completely detached from the HRB requirements, or having a different?
I think this, well, we could discuss, what board even would review something
Yeah.
like this, right? I mean, it could be HRB, but not necessarily.
Gotcha. Any other comments on that checklist on 4 and 5?
I'm looking down at number 3, and it's off the bottom of my page here, but embodies a distinctive style, and you say there it's not necessary. I think, probably it is very necessary.
Yes, I was thinking of actually the boathouse, the house that's,
Alan Knight's house.
yes, up, and how it isn't characteristic of a type, period, region, or method of construction.
But it's one of those special cases.
Yeah, yeah. So we're saying it also is required of the level 2 home, that it does embody a distinctive characteristic, blah, blah, blah. And yet it doesn't fit necessarily into a style of house.
But that's historic, I think, mainly or largely because of Alan Knight, too, and who he was. So,
But you
that.
talk about that in number 4.
Has yielded or has the potential to yield information important to the prehistory or history of the local area. Yeah.
Maybe I'm on the wrong page. Yep, I'm on the next page.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I didn't want to exclude, bizarre houses. But that's where I think we've missed kind of a lot, saving. We have no safety for our older homes that we consider kind of precious Carmel homes. We have no way of saving them if they aren't deemed historic, and it's hard to be deemed historic, and a lot of people don't want their home to be deemed historic for obvious reasons. So this was an attempt to try and protect some of those older homes, obviously, that otherwise can be scraped without a thought. And so that's why the level 2 homes are fairly inclusive, I guess, because, and certainly determined by committee whether they fit in level 2, as opposed to strictly, what level 1 homes are, which is pretty easy to eliminate a home as historic itself, but it gives us more leeway in the level 2 designation to say, yes, this fits. This is something we want to save.
I think this is an admirable proposal. I think that the basic intent, I'm all for it, but I just don't like the limitations.
The limitations?
On
Okay.
style.
On style, okay.
It has to include our history. It has to include what was built in this town. And if it's a good representative of the period, I think it should have a chance.
Well, one rationale, of course, I'm all for traditional, as you know, but one rationale is that homes that are built more recently are not going to typically be torn down. It's the older homes that are going to be torn down.
Of course.
So
Of course.
that's the focus of this, and of course the focus of what I'm interested in as well.
We're all talking about
obviously.
the same thing.
Yeah. So I don't know what to say about that. If there's something specifically,
Is this something that maybe the planning commission would catch and suggest a level 2 review?
well, I think the planning department is probably where it would first start, right? Rather than because the planning commission doesn't see track 1 homes, for example. Of course, those aren't really being torn down either. What do you think, Brandon?
I'll let Marnie chime in too, but my initial feeling is if, the planning department is tasked with this, so as you all know, the progression of this is going to be this body's making a recommendation to city council on basically whether thumbs up or thumbs down to even explore this as a city policy. So if it gets, far enough down the road and becomes a policy, in order for a planning department, for my staff to be able to say, oh, this looks like it qualifies for level 2, we would need some criteria. So to, Board Member Crowman's point earlier, this page we're looking at right now, there really are no criteria for something to qualify. And Board Member Hall was talking, well, the boards and commissions are set up to identify things like this. That's not really, that's a discretionary type of decision. Staff doesn't really function at the discretionary level. So we would need some sort of checklist or criteria to be able to determine if something met a minimum to send through for that processing. So
Okay.
that's sort of where, if asked, that's my response.
Okay, well, we do have a checklist now, but
Okay.
we haven't gone over it yet. This
Okay.
is something I've just created a few weeks ago, so after we last met, because we talked about needing a checklist. All right. Okay, well, let's keep going. I don't know quite, unless we have very specific, I'll look this over again in terms of not necessary and see what may be necessary.
I would just make one comment on page 5, at the bottom, and this goes to it says it's the same
Uh-huh,
as the historic review for a level 1 review. A resource less than 50 years old may be eligible if it has exceptional importance. I think that's, again, mixing historic preservation law, the current ordinance, with this, and obviously if they met that requirement, it would be level 1, I would think. So
okay.
I just don't know if it's applicable to them.
All right, I'll put a question mark on that one. All right, that's a good point. All right, are we ready to move to proposed allowances, incentives for level 2 homes? And this, of course, is fodder for the council. But just some suggestions of what might possibly be an incentive for a level 2 home. And I know we've been going over this in the design guidelines as well.
I had a couple comments on this one.
Uh-huh.
Again, and I'll have some comments at the end, but just to review this page, some of these are, like number 2, allow upgrades inside the home. That's already allowed. Allow replacement of any structure where necessary due to, if it's extensive rot, that's already allowed.
You're right. Okay, 2 and 3 aren't necessary.
Yeah. Fast track permit process. I have a feeling this will be anything but a fast track. You'll have at least 2 HRB meetings and a planning commission meeting.
Well, not necessarily 2, according to what I wrote later.
Okay, I got confused because I thought there was one that was, first we have to determine whether it's eligible for level 2. Then if they're doing a project, we would have to evaluate it based on that. Is that not?
Well, that would go to the planning department, I believe. We'll get to that, and we can change it if we want to, but it could just stay within the planning department.
Okay. But in any case, I think it's, because of that discretion, so much of this needs to have discretionary review. I don't know if that's really going to really happen. You know what I mean? It does require, staff time, reports, review by the different, agendizing for the different bodies. So it's not going to be quick.
I'll put a question mark by that one.
Maybe something about the permitting process, could make things easier. And I also, when I looked at them, I thought, tree removal, if the arborist allows it, would be huge because, we see homes being renovated around trees now and stuff like that. And that's a point of huge consternation among at least a lot of people I know. And then the relaxing of the parking permit, I know we do that already, based on feasibility, right? Like if there's parking, like if there's no available parking or way to put off-street parking on a property, we do waive that from time to time. So maybe that's already something that we could do. That would be a winner as well.
Yeah, I think on this side, let's see, the first one, I don't know if it's flexibility, I guess it depends what you mean, but if flexibility and requirements for a home to be built before today's codes, I mean, anything built would need to be up to code legally.
Oh, the illegal non-conforming issues, yeah, that
Well, that's
are
usually
already
considered
there.
zoning, right?
Yeah.
So that's different than building codes.
Well, a lot of this would require zoning changes, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But I read that as to be like you put a, you know, like a mudroom sink in a room that wasn't permitted, and, you know, that was 40 years ago, and rather than having to mess with it now, is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're thinking of, like forgiveness of some of those items?
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
grandfathering in.
Yeah.
grandfathering in, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say parking requirements, I think that is a good, possible incentive. Basements, yes. Setback requirements, yes. Tree removal, that seems to be a separate issue entirely, so I would think that would probably need to still go under forest and beach and the city forester. The one that's not listed here that I think is actually considering the strict rules on site coverage in Carmel, you know, having some leeway on site coverage.
Oh,
You know, when
floor
you're-
area ratio was what I meant.
That's not the same
But that's the
thing.
same, not the same,
Yeah.
okay, site coverage,
So site
yes.
coverage, they have for example, when you do additions, if you're over coverage, for example, in site coverage, you have to
Yeah.
eliminate 2 square feet of site coverage that you're over for every 1 square feet you add in floor area. Maybe that could be relaxed as part
Yeah.
of it.
I actually found that I was more penalized with an older home than a new home would be on site coverage. Yeah.
I wonder about drainage requirements. I think that's pretty important. How do you mean that?
Well, that, you know, these are things that I don't know a heck of a lot about. I know I had to go through drainage requirements. And that, again, might be illegal non-conforming issue, fall under that, where if you don't already have a drainage system, that it would be okay that you don't put one in, you know? I don't know, you know, how much remodeling you have to do before you have to go by the drainage requirements, you know, whether that kicks in.
Yeah, it can be hard on the neighbors and, you know,
Oh, yeah.
all kinds of things, you know,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
It
so,
could cause erosion and.
yeah. These are planning, you know, people who really know all about this, the planning people, would have to probably pass some judgment
Yeah,
on
okay, yeah.
what could be done and what couldn't be done realistically. Yeah. And in any individual case of a house coming in, they will be looking at the house itself and the situation of the house and what incentives might apply or might not apply for that house. And also the owner may have something they really want to do that an incentive would qualify for an incentive and don't care about drainage or whatever. You know, it doesn't mean we're going to be doing all of this, of course.
Drainage is not important, so we shouldn't waste time on that.
Yeah, so. Okay, any other questions or comments on incentives? I mean, this requires, I realize, more detail, more work, and more approval too from the council, because this is the critical issue, I would think, for the council, is what the incentives might be, especially if it had anything to do with money. They probably wouldn't care as much about the building requirements, but the planning department would care about that. But they would be concerned if they were cutting the permit process in half or reducing fees, because that's going to affect their budget.
Well, speaking of money, doesn't this depend on being piggybacked onto what is happening now with the design review that's going on?
Yes,
In order to get it through, is that feasible? Can that still happen?
yes.
I guess that's a
Well,
question to staff.
Can I look to you, Brandon, for that one?
I was looking at you first. I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Do you mean, would this be able to be bolted on to
The changes that would have to be made
Uh-huh.
I guess in the codes, I don't.
Yeah, the question is, would they be bolted on to the Design Traditions project?
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a great question, and that's, part of the reason this is ultimately a question for city council, because it's, additional staff time, it's policy work, it's code amendments, it's ultimately, because this lives in our zoning code, it's an amendment to our local coastal program. There are questions to be answered about how something like this dovetails in with our certified local government program. I think you raised earlier, Board Member Goodhue, that, does this start to dovetail with, actual historic resource law. How do we call it? So there's a lot of work to be done with something like this for sure. It may be, because of where the Design Traditions project is already, they could say, yeah, we want to do this, but, don't hold up the Design Traditions project, finish that, and then, do an amendment basically to it.
I got the understanding, though, to start all over again would be hideously expensive for the city if it did not go in as part of what's happening now.
It certainly doesn't have to. I mean, I don't know if we would necessarily hire a consultant like a Winter & Company to do this. This, I think, could be something we could do at a staff level with our attorneys if we wanted to do it as an amendment after everything was adopted, because this is more singularly focused. But yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but it's the same type of process as what's going on for the Design Traditions project right now. So if there's a way to fold it in there, that's the best way to do it. I just don't know if the timing meshes up with what is left to do on this. Yeah.
Well, I kind of thought that one of the reasons why we were really trying to attack this was to try and get it bolted onto that. I mean, there's no guarantee, but.
Yeah, no guarantee, certainly.
I think we're kind of have discussed that a couple times, is if we get this polished and before the city council, it's a better chance to do it now than later.
It would be the much more efficient way to do it, that's for sure. But yeah.
That was kind of a motivation to, I hated that we all had to convene for just one agenda item, but I was also looking at the clock, and we had put it off last time, and I thought, well, if we really want to piggyback it on the design guidelines, maybe we need to discuss it today. So if we lose local control, of course, for all of our designs, it's sort of like rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic, isn't it? But we'll proceed as if. So, okay, that's good feedback on the incentives. Anything else on that? All right, next page. We have the steps to establish level 2 homes, and I just tried to go through like what the procedure would look like with minimum taxing, I guess, of either the planning department or the historic resources board in the process. And so when it was coming over the counter, I guess it would be determined whether, if it were a part of the design guidelines, which the applicant will have read, then they will be aware of the level 2 program and what it has to offer and whether they would potentially qualify for it at least. And then they could discuss that with the planning people. This is all in my own head. And then be potentially agendized with the HRB. And we would then just look at all the information in the home and decide whether it truly did qualify for a level 2 status. And then the planning department would obviously get that information and then work with the client. If the client wanted to meet with us, then I don't see any reason why they shouldn't, but I don't see it as a necessary step that the planning department could then go forward with them in discussing the incentives and whatnot and carry on.
What if they aren't remodeling and they want to declare their home as a level 2 resource? How would they even know about the program?
Well,
Why would they want to?
Well, maybe they want their house to be declared a level 2 historic home because that's, they want the plaque or they want the recognition, or they just think that they'd like to keep that house like that.
That's a very good question, because there are people like that really do want to do that, including me. And so when we get down to ways to promote the program, I think we talk about the design guidelines, which they wouldn't be reading, is your point, brochure, and seminars, videos, city website list of examples of level 2 homes. And so potentially it could be on the city website as well. So those are all ways to get the word out. And a lot of that could be volunteer work. All right, steps to establishing the level 2 homes. Were there any comments on this?
I guess I do have one as I think about it, about what boards, I mean, this, since we are talking about an old home, we're trying to maintain the character of, so I'm thinking out loud here, but I think there needs to be obviously a tight, at least a clear eligibility requirements for establishing a level 2 designation, but there also needs to be or criteria, specific criteria for evaluating those designs once they come back. And it seems to me, I can't think of another entity or body that would review that other than us. And it seems like there's a lot of possibilities for abuse in this. If you have a level 2 designation and then they they're allowed to do a massive addition, they possibly cover up, they change the scale of it, we're allowing now more, it has to be somewhat subordinate, but not so much subordinate as the level 1. It sounds like that needs to be a whole nother section of like how you evaluate the designs once they come back, once they achieve their level 2 designation. How we have to evaluate whether those still meet the intent of the ordinance, which is to maintain this old housing stock.
Yeah, I should think, there are 2 steps here. They are basically the most important one is once they have the designation, they come before this board, right?
Yes, well, we see it. I don't know if they personally, I suppose they would personally come before us as well. Yes, we would be the ones.
Yes,
that,
unless staff turns them
Yeah.
down,
yeah.
from the get-go.
Yeah,
So,
or the staff can make a
yeah.
determination.
Yeah.
They need to have
I should think
very clear criteria to
should be
evaluate
the
it,
same as it is now.
Okay,
as
that's,
we do,
yeah,
or
exactly.
Planning Commission does.
But that kind of goes back to.
With the checklist, yeah.
But that also kind of goes back to Eric's, fast track permitting process. I mean, we could do it where you apply for HRB designation, either level 1 or level 2. It goes to a staff study. Staff says, level 1, no, you're not eligible. Do you want to try and go for level 2, or do you want to be designated as level 2? Or level 2, it could just be a staff approval. Then we validate it, and then, so I think you wouldn't necessarily need 2 HRB visits. It would be the staff assessment first, then our assessment, and then they could go into it with the
Right.
with the planning commission, ultimately approving the design.
This is probably a horrible thing to say, but when it talks about speeded up process for permits, I guess you can't put something like this ahead of somebody else who's in line. I mean, that would not be.
I don't think that's going to be
Proper.
one of your
No.
incentives,
No.
put it that way.
Yeah. One thing I did have a question. You said, in here you said, it is unlikely that a subsequent owner would demolish or extensively remodel a home that has level 2 qualified remodel or rebuild prior to the owner. But I don't understand why that would be unlikely. If ultimately I want to, this is not a binding, designation necessarily. They're not going to get any tangible benefits because the tangible benefits would have already been taken by the people that did that.
Right.
So if they're hell-bent on, scraping it off and building something else, why would they? Why would it be unlikely that they would?
Well, let's say the level 2 home had been able to be closer to the property line, or was able to add something that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to add. By eliminating the house, they've eliminated part of the square footage. They go back to the original requirements that the planning department has for how to build a house. So in part because it's a newer build, I guess you'd say, that someone has taken the time and energy and money to do that, would be a disincentive for scraping it. The other would be that they'd lose their incentives if they scraped it.
I got you.
Okay, but if they go through with the project that's been approved with a level 2 designation, and they do the project and they get exceptions to setback or whatever, are you saying they could, that designation could be eliminated and the next owner could tear it down? Is that what I thought we're trying to prevent that.
No, he's saying, why would they tear it down? And I'm
But the
saying
next
a
owner can tear it
disincentive to
down.
tearing it down would be that it
Well,
had been allowed to
Okay,
have
I thought I thought you couldn't tear it down, or is that,
Oh.
I was gonna ask about this question anyway, about the deed restriction involved, and how that, you say it wouldn't be a deed restriction,
Right,
so
It
it'd
would
just
be-
be,
recorded here, yeah.
Voluntary
okay,
program.
so I'm just curious how the staff or the city would regulate that. I mean, or the it's hypothetical, but,
And maybe I'm confused, but the way I read it, it wouldn't be like a historic home designation where you know, now in perpetuity, it has to more or less remain in its current state, or, you know, the additions have to follow under HRB guidelines. This one was a voluntary process, you know, wasn't written in stone, so I mean, ultimately, the way I read this, or the previous editions of this, was that it was not nearly as restrictive, and you could, if you wanted to, the next owner or 2 owners down could, you know,
They
demolish
could
it.
demolish it,
Yeah.
but they'd lose whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but they would probably, you know, take other options to get whatever it is that they need. They could probably still do a basement if they needed to. They could probably put more square footage on there, depending on the size of the lot. And people who are coming into town have so much money now that I don't think it would slow them down. But anything that will help to preserve the older houses, I'm all for.
Yeah.
This is not a you know, deal killer with me at all.
So you did mention in here, and that actually just makes me think, I'm sorry to jump in again, but that makes me think, so you say in here that only the first generation of level 2 gets the benefits, right?
Right.
But what if somebody bought a level 2 house and then decided, oh, I wanna, you know, do something, I wanna do an addition that's remains in keeping with the level 2 tradition, this is, you know, 2 owners after the initial, could they then
Good question.
get benefits again?
According to this, I
Yeah.
mean, anything's possible.
Right.
But I had said one-time only incentives for a level 2 home, so that they couldn't just keep adding, you know, oh, I want it level 2 again, I'm gonna add more incentives,
Roger.
or get more incentives, no.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt whoever, I think I might have interrupted.
Fine, okay.
yeah.
All right, so I don't know of any changes in that anyone has said, am I correct? The next page, ways to promote the program, we just went over those. And if there, I'm sure there may be other ways that come up or whatever. Then we're to the checklist, and I wanted to go over those with you because this is new. So I had stuck in at the front, at the top, because I'm still not clear myself on how the planning department works with this. Any external plan changes before the planning department for a home 50 years old or older is to be considered for historic status or level 2 status by the HRB for discussion. Is it true, Marnie, that when a house is going to be demolished, let's say, and it's a 1945 house, that it automatically goes for review before the HRB to see if it is historic or not?
So the process starts at a staff level. So when we get that application for demolition or any type of exterior remodel, we check to see how old the house is. We check to see if it's been evaluated previously for historical significance. Those reviews are only good for 5 years. So something could have been reviewed, determined not historic, and then that could expire. So we check to see if that has occurred, and we check to see if it's on the inventory. So we do that with every planning application.
Okay, and so let's say a house is over 50 years old and it's been 6 years since it was last looked at for historic, or has never been looked at for historic status. That would then automatically go to us?
No, staff would engage our consultant to do a historic evaluation.
Okay,
If the consultant found some historical significance, we'd do a more intensive review. And then if the consultant finds that it does meet all the criteria for listing, we would list it.
okay.
The board would only see it if the applicant challenged the listing.
Okay.
Now, once it's on the inventory, any substantial change to the exterior typically will come to the board for review.
Okay.
But that's once it's already been listed.
So we might not even see a house that becomes historic. Is that correct?
Yeah, until such time that they want to remodel it or make a change
Okay. Okay.
or on appeal.
All right. That's interesting. Okay. So it's every 5 years. And it's based strictly on the consultant's opinion of whether it's historic or not.
So the consultant is using our historic context statement, which ideally we'll be updating every 5 years. So the two kind of go hand in hand. That 5-year time frame was intended to coincide with 5-year updates to the historic context statement. So the consultant is using that as the basis for their evaluation of the home.
Okay. So we will see only things that have been deemed historic at this point in time, only things that have been deemed historic by the consultant, in which they want to do some major alteration to the exterior. Is that correct? Exterior only?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. So this top one is not true. Checklist A is representative of at least one traditional historic theme, needn't be an exact representation, meaning that, you know, if it's craftsman but it has a weird roof for a craftsman or something, it may still be considered as a level 2 potentially. We ran across that just recently where it was not absolutely true to a particular style of house, but was still potentially historic. Okay. So is representative of at least one traditional historic theme. Now this is assuming, of course, it has not been designated historic. Has basic integrity. Is 50 years of age or older. So this is presumably for the planning department to let them know whether it should come to us or not, if the owner is interested. And Eric's comment, a resource of a less than 50-year-old may be eligible to, I think we can take that out because it's true of a historic, right? It's true for historic. It doesn't need to be true, I guess, for a level 2, right? Embodies the character of a cottage in a village in the forest, see qualifying characteristics for level 2 protection and Appendix A in the proposal. Building plans involve changes beyond deck and patio. This was, you know, for any smaller kinds of things, it doesn't seem to apply. If it involves deck and patio additions or changes, landscaping changes, roof or other repairs or replacements in kind, we don't want to be seeing those.
And
Right.
with D though, again, you know, we've got a very narrow aperture, and I understand the intent and all that stuff, but again, if we're only gonna be looking at cottages, then I think we're doing this concept injustice. We have to broaden that out to, you know, to kind of mirror or at least parallel what we look at HRB. So it doesn't have to just be a cottage, it can be a,
I
you know,
think
one of a lot of
it
different
really
things.
has to be based on the same requirements we have for HRB, I think.
Okay, let's see.
Because in the Appendix A, again, all you've got is the traditional style
Yeah.
homes, which, you know, we all love and which we all agree are very important here, but
Well, there is one ranch style in there and one prairie, I guess, in there in the examples, which were part of the historic context statement, I believe.
I don't know, I saw wonderful photographs in the historic context statement to illustrate styles. And I think they could easily be used again.
I'll look at those.
I think some of these, if they were built, a lot of people wouldn't be happy with them.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not so worried about the newer buildings, you know, because they're typically not torn down. The whole purpose of this, of course, was to save the old cottages that are being torn down. And if it gets too far into, well, let's accept everything, then I'll rescind my, my level two.
I don't think we're accepting everything. I think we would be accepting examples of what was being built at a given time that are a good example. For instance, on San Carlos and 13th, there are 2 vernacular houses there. You would call them modern, I guess. But they're so typical of what was built in Carmel at the period. And, you know, I think those things, they shouldn't just be swept away. We would want to give them some kind of consideration, but you look at them and you think, well, I don't want to live there, but, you know, but somebody does, and somebody may want to, and they're representative.
I think I'm trying to figure out, yeah, and one was on tour, I believe, yeah.
No, I don't think so. I'd be amazed if these were on tour.
Well, there's one I'm thinking of that was 50s.
They're on the east side of the street, right there on the corner.
Yeah. One actually was on tour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be a good example of something that's out of the realm of what I was really considering, but it's 50s. I guess was considered modern in its day, you know. So anyway, I can look at this in relation to all of that and come back. I don't know if we want to go ahead with looking at the incentives program for the council at this point in time, or waiting until we do a little more massaging of this, if it's still something people want to do or feel is worth doing. I suppose we should vote on that. I don't know.
I think, Eric, you said you were holding some comments for the
Yeah.
end. Also, I just, well, let's do those, and then we can decide what next step we want to take.
Okay.
So anybody have any other comments before Eric provides his? Okay.
Okay. Well, first, I just wanted to, you know, acknowledge, and I think it seems like there's almost somewhat of a consensus that they're, you know, preserving Carmel's aging housing stock is a worthy goal and is worth trying. And I would just say, you know, before I go into some of this stuff, you know, writing ordinances and new regulations are really difficult. And you have to think of all the scenarios. And so I do want to, you know, I really appreciate Carol's love for the town and the hard work she put into it. And so just starting, I'm going to go through this a little bit and give you my thoughts about it. In terms of the mission statement, and I sort of slightly modified it as a suggestion, and I'll talk about the reasons for that in a bit. I just simply, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, to help preserve unique residential character of Carmel-by-the-Sea with an incentive program to preserve older homes which reflect that character. And then I thought of adding and exemplify the principles of the city's residential design guidelines. So, and then in the second paragraph, which is talking about the purpose of this proposal is to establish a new voluntary level 2 residential status for homes that, and I kind of rephrased it a little bit here to say, that are not eligible for the city's historic inventory, nor the state or national historic registries, but which cumulatively help maintain the unique character of our village in the forest. That's, I thought, just a slightly different language that I think helps it.
Can you share those with me?
Of course.
If we decide to go ahead with this?
Sure. And then I want to get to the eligibility criteria, which I think we're all having a little difficulty with. So the eligibility requirements are, you know, we have to have something clear for the HRB or whatever board and commission looks at this, and the staff and the public, to understand why a particular house is offered a level 2 designation or is not. There needs to be, I know there's always going to be judgment calls and subjectivity involved, but I think there needs to be something slightly objective and clear to be able to state why this particular house meets that and got the designation. And I also think it's really important for the eligibility criteria to be consistent with the city's general plan and the design guidelines. So the current document we're looking at here references homes through the 40s. There's a paragraph in the beginning of the eligibility requirements that talks about homes through the 40s and then lists some architectural styles, specifically highlighting Storybook, which I know is a personal favorite of Carol's. When I was reading that, I was thinking of a question whether how many, homes that are in the Storybook style built before 1950 are not already on the historic inventory. Because I think most of those were done by Comstock, and Comstock being in the historic context statement, most of those are considered probably on the inventory already, unless they had some integrity issue. So I thought that would, I'm not sure exactly how many we're talking about here. The other thing I was noticing when there was a listing of styles is that I think a lot of what we would think of as ones we might save and examples of what we might save are probably from the style that's been called vernacular, which is a little more humble, board and bat cottages that were single wall construction built by, these professors from Berkeley and people that didn't have a lot of money. And those gave Carmel its original character and continue, and those are the ones that are really being torn down.
Mm-hmm.
So
add in vernacular. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to make a different point actually.
Okay.
And I did want to know. I didn't notice there was the negative reference about modernism were removed.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. I thought you'd be happy with that.
So the fact is that homes which reflect the character of the village come from many different styles. So I'm actually thinking listing the styles, some styles while leaving out others, is a problem. I think maybe eliminating style from the eligibility requirements might be in order, because I think all these different styles, as long as they're old buildings, and ones which we love, maybe are worthy of saving. And so just using criteria based on style, and then maybe forgetting one, and then that's not allowed, seems to be a little problematic, like the special ones like the ship house, for example.
Mm-hmm. In other words, not even listing all of these here.
Yeah, the styles thing is, well, let me finish, and I'll
okay.
I'll just let people can comment on this, I guess, when I'm done. But then after that, from your document, there's a list of possible characteristics, and I'm sort of with Esther on this one. The problem with a laundry list of elements or pieces of a structure is that the house, which reflects Carmel's unique character, is not necessarily a sum of these small pieces.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily at all reflect Carmel's character by simply having one of those elements necessarily in a house. And I think the best illustration of this point actually comes from that appendix, where you saw all those different styles listed with the little illustrations, and I would venture to say virtually none of those images of homes reflect Carmel's unique character.
Yeah.
And probably most of those we wouldn't want there. Most are grand, formal, massive, and really completely inappropriate, and really no matter what the style. And I was going to just single out the contemporary as being particularly bad. So
we can eliminate the appendix A. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that appendix. I'm kind of with Esther. If we're going to do a description of styles or what we think are in keeping of it, we should definitely be using the photos of the best examples in Carmel.
Yeah. Okay.
So then what would be a reasonable eligibility criteria? definitely age, as we talked about before. I mean, I think there is discussion, I just throw this out for debate, whether the 50-year mark is old enough, since most of the ones you're seem to be targeting are 1940s and below. I guess there is the question of whether, you know, this rolling idea of houses. Well, I mean, I don't really have a problem with that as I think about it. If it, you know, in 20 years, houses that are now 30 years old could be eligible, perhaps they are appropriate to be considered. So what I was thinking as one way to put down the criteria, a criteria, and it ties back then to the basis of a lot of the ordinances, is having whatever a level 2 designation, a structure from that, exemplify the character of Carmel-by-the-Sea as defined by the principles in the residential design guidelines. So from the current guidelines, I'll just kind of quote or paraphrase, the enduring principles are variety, modesty, and simplicity. The house draws from and contributes to its neighborhood by generously providing open space and exemplifying the tradition of simple homes set amid a forest landscape. Then there's the update that's being worked on, and they have outlined, the steering committee has outlined these 6 principles, which I still think can apply. You know, preserve and enhance the forest, subordinate the character and continuity of the forest, natural environment, and natural features of its own site. It fits in and is part of a neighborhood context. It retains and is part of the Carmel's architectural heritage. You know, and then that statement actually connects it back to the historic context statement, which addresses style and all the different styles that are part of that heritage. It also discusses preferred materials, which may be also a good way to relate it, give criteria. Number 5 is the structure of modesty and restraint, which relates back to that original. And 6 is it detailed authentically and consistently. So really, if a house doesn't exemplify all those principles, I don't know if we'd want it to be eligible, right? And a lot of those old homes we're talking about are smaller on the lot, maintain that forest character really well. And I mean, the design guidelines that are being worked on and the previous ones were about defining this residential character of Carmel that's unique. And so by establishing that as maybe one of the criteria, as maybe the most important criteria, I think that's a way to have this make a little more sense, right? In my interpretation, my thinking. And then I was thinking in terms of application-wise, which Carol and I had talked about, was this idea of, you know, when you submit, they have to provide a narrative showing how, instead of a new house, how and this existing house exemplifies those guidelines, which I don't think should be hard to do for most of those ones we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But for a level 2 designation, if you had a house that was built in 1959 and is a storybook replica house that has all the features and everything else, it's now over 50 years old, that could qualify as a level 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think opening up the aperture is important based on that rolling age timeline. But I think also your comment of, you know, does it fit in those 6 characteristics is pretty spot on, and that actually gets after what Carol's, I think, focused on doing, especially when you look at size, space, spatial relationship, and the neighborhood that Esther has been talking about. So I think that's a great correlation.
So to incorporate those 6 points, which I'm intimately familiar with, yeah.
So instead of
As is
style,
Brandon.
because as exemplified by that last appendix, those styles doesn't mean, something in one of those styles doesn't mean you'd want to keep it.
Yeah,
And it may be completely inappropriate.
yeah, yeah. All right, and so you had mentioned, I put the 50 years or older because of what you had said last time, and you're now saying maybe we should restrict it to the 1940s and before?
Not necessarily, I was just throwing it out as a discussion item.
Oh,
Um,
I mean, that's another option, is to just make it older than the historic. We wanted to, your point was to keep it consistent with the historic guidelines as well, which kind of made some sense, but we could make it for
Well, you
older
could make
homes.
it, you know, 1950 and below is 70 years ago,
Yeah.
not 50
So we could
years
make
ago.
it 70 years and
You could
older.
extend it, and then,
Okay,
But if you put a hard line on it, then I think it's gonna exclude a bunch of types of houses, and then there's no rolling,
but I'm,
so now we just keep getting older and older and older and older.
well,
Yeah,
if you
I-
say 70 years, then that rolls too.
that rolls, the 70 years rolls.
Yeah, but I don't know, the 50 years, you know, sounds good to me.
Okay.
I don't really see, the house has to qualify, it has to have the characteristics that are desirable. And if it's 50 years old, or if it's just not, if it's not 70 years old, it doesn't qualify, I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense, to
Okay.
me anyhow.
So the other criteria I was thinking, I just want to bring up the size as as one issue. I think you were relegating it to 1 story.
Yeah, I don't know why that, I read that and was surprised I'd put that in. Oh, yeah, there it is.
I mean, I was just thinking there may be,
Number 3, yeah. I don't know why I said 1 story. It was because I was thinking small, I guess. But I don't know that we need to restrict it to a 1-story home. Like Joe Mora's house is 2 stories and, you know.
I mean, there's certainly nice ones that are, you know, have 1 and 2-story elements.
Yeah, I think I'll take that out if everyone agrees. It can be small and still be 2-story.
So like,
But do you regulate, I mean, the other way is floor area.
Yeah,
If they're over the floor area from which the current zoning allows, maybe that's too big.
to be considered level 2. Well, if it's sitting on 2 lots, you know.
Well, that would, if it's 2 lots, you're allowed more floor
Yeah,
area.
Yeah, that's right. What is the floor area ratio now?
I mean, 45.
45%.
45.
40 by
Oh, yeah, I
100
knew
lots.
that. Or
And then-
less.
Then there's the issue of integrity. Should there be some stipulation about, you know, the definition of basic integrity? I know you have association, feeling, setting, location, design, materials, or workmanship. I mean, should homes, for example, that have been added more than 50% of their original area, should those be allowed? Should there be some percentage of,
You know,
because otherwise, what's left?
yeah, I think back, you know, one of the questions I have in my own mind is, let's say a house was built in the 1920s and additions were built in the 1940s and the 1950s, which is still well under or over 50 years ago, and yet it then doesn't qualify as historic because it's been added onto. And I'm thinking, well, why aren't those other areas historic too? I don't know. So that's been a question in my own mind of how to answer that question. Do either of you have comments on that?
Integrity means, to me, the original concept of the house. And so maybe these additions have destroyed somehow the integrity of the original design.
You know, that being said, I've certainly seen houses which are these little board and bat shacks that have been added to over the years and still are kind of like these Carmel charmers, like Carol describes them.
Yeah, I
Sure.
think that's
Yeah,
what we're
that's
trying
true.
to save too.
That's true, too.
I mean, they aren't historic,
Right.
but they're worth saving.
And that's usually why they aren't.
And
because-
that's usually why they aren't,
Like-
exactly.
Like that brown, it's a brown shingle house, I think it's on Monte Verde and like 4th, and it's been really not loved. But it still has got a kind of a feel, the intent of the house feel. That to me is like a kind of house that you're really focused in on, this type of thing, where it probably, I'm sure it's not historic, just because it's been really hodgepodged up, but it still retains the essential characteristics of the vernacular. It's a kind of I don't even know what it is, arts and craftsman-y kind of style.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I totally agree with that. I mean, when I said integrity, it's just the way I had my concept of what integrity means. But I don't know that this is really necessary here with this designation.
Well, I think it's, but that, I think it is somewhat important, right? And I just think it needs to be defined clearly in whatever this possible ordinance might be.
Yeah. Of course,
Integrity in terms of what we mean by it for this particular ordinance, not
right.
the general definition we use for the rest of our
Certainly a
historic
more
preservation law.
lax definition of integrity, I would think. I started all this because of my own home, so I hate to keep mentioning it, but it was added on to, and then added on to, and then added on to, and so it's never been deemed historic, but it's certainly a quintessential level 2 home in my mind. And it's on 2 3/4 lots, so that's, you know, it's still, the floor area ratio and all that's still okay. So that's why I think the level 2 homes I thought more leniently about, because obviously I thought, well, why isn't a 1945 addition considered part of the historic home? You know, no, it wasn't built by the same people as the 1927 home was, but, and I don't know who it was built by, but, you know, it's still very much a quintessential Carmel home. So that's kind of where all this came from, I guess.
Yeah, so it's just a matter of thinking about those homes you're talking about that have been added to over time. Is there a point where a loss of integrity would make it ineligible? And how is that defined?
Yeah.
So let me just go on quickly to the incentive structures. We talked about parking. I can imagine something like, you know, in all Carmel lots, you basically have to devote 200 square feet for a garage. Maybe that's waived, so you get an extra 200 square feet. Basements, which don't affect the appearance from the street or the public right-of-way, expand that idea. I mean, we have the volumetrics, which allow every extra base floor area you put underneath, you get an extra one. Maybe it's more expansive than that. If you keep the original structure, maybe you need to keep the basement. You can always lift things up and build basements underneath homes. So you could possibly have full basements under structures. You know, I think there's limitations when you get into the yard or beyond the envelope of the house, you know, where you have trees and things like that. But, you know, that's something to definitely think about. Setback requirements, I was thinking, you know, especially cumulative side yard ones are, could be relaxed. Volumetrics could be relaxed. And then again, the big one for me, which I think is for a lot of people, is just the site coverage, since it is really one of the most restrictive parts of Carmel ordinances now.
I have that to add.
But I think what also, which I brought up, needs to be worked on is this, a criteria for what projects come back for review. You know, once it's given level 2 designation, what would you approve and what would you not approve? You know, what and why? So that needs to be a lot more clear, but I think before we take things forward. As I said, this is kind of difficult work. I think it has to relate, of course, back to the design guidelines, but it'd be nice to get even more specific than that. And the other thing to think about is, which I think if you were to bring it before council would, I think, really appreciate some case studies of how this would work. And I think everybody would appreciate that, because they
We'd all appreciate that, yes.
They want to see, is this, how would this be effective? And examples of that. I mean, I could think of some of my own projects which could be examples of it, but or, you know, obviously we design things per the standards that exist now, but what could we have done? I mean, certainly the clients I have, for example, on some of these homes I'm thinking of, have the right to tear them down. And, you know, if they were different people, maybe they would choose to do that. So if you were allowed, for example, a more expansive basement area, you get all this extra square footage that way, and still, when you walk by the house, it looks like
The
it
original
did
one.
50
Yeah.
years ago. So those are something to think about. Again, I think we probably need a little more work before I'm comfortable moving forward. Because I don't want to certainly bring something forward to the council without having a chance of approval. I don't think we're at that point yet.
Mr. Chair, could I offer something just from a process perspective?
Yes, sir.
That's okay. So having done a few of these types of things, I know that the city council appreciates early thumbs up, thumbs down conversations. Like, they don't really want to see at this point a fully baked program. So I think what you could consider is either, sending this with the comments that you received today, or, revising it, coming back again. But I think really what the council wants to see with these types of things early on is the bigger sort of idea, and then what's the workload to get it across. So like Board Member Dyer was just talking about, you're going to have to write the actual zoning code regulations, but you're also going to have to develop some specific design guidelines for this. Like, what are the criteria to approve a project under a level 2? Because they may be different, and they probably will be different. So what we would do as staff is, if the HRB decided to move this forward for that sort of thumbs up, thumbs down policy, does the city council want to invest time in this? We would lay those things out. We've been taking notes, obviously, what we've been talking about today. What are those policy decisions? What's the work? What's the zoning code work that has to be done? Design work that has to be done? How would the incentives work? And if they, at that point, if they heard that level of this highest level, and said, yes, proceed with this, then we would come back to this group, refine some of that stuff, come up with some of those pictures, the case studies, and go back to council one more time for a more detailed policy direction meeting. So the first meeting on these types of things is always thumbs up, thumbs down, green light. The second meeting is early policy direction. Then staff goes away, drafts it, and then starts through the junior boards and commissions. So HRB, Planning Commission, ultimately to City Council for adoption. So that's sort of how it would go down. If you felt like this needed more refinement before you got that thumbs up, thumbs down from council, that's certainly the HRB's prerogative. But I did just want to share that typically they like a pretty lean conversation, high level, what are we talking about here conversation with the first one.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
I think I'd be most comfortable understanding what would be presented to council before voting to send it to them. So I think, in my mind, maybe one more, pass, and then have, if we're ready to have staff prepare what they would present to council, then we would approve that to go forward.
Yeah. So any other questions or comments? I think we open up back out to the public, and then we come back and decide our next steps. So any other things that we want to discuss, not that we can't at a later time? Okay. So that being said, let's open it back up to the public, both in the room and on Zoom, if anyone has any comments that they'd like to make.
Bozo the Clown, I guess, is
I'm not sure. Is there maybe there's a hand up? We
No.
can't see the. Oh, okay.
No hands on Zoom, and our one public member
Gotcha.
is
Our
2
vast
thumbs
public
up.
audience is not willing to speak. Okay, so we'll close it back out and bring it back to the board. All right. So I think we've got to retain the kind of the notion that we already have talked about, that we're on this timeline. Sooner is better, but at the same time, we don't want to provide something that we don't think is our best work to the council. So I'm going to start by giving Carol my notes, but what I think we should do is we should provide her notes, and then I think what we need to do is maybe craft kind of an exum that we would send to the staff to send to the council, and then we can continue at the same time kind of revising this whole thing. And so maybe we can send Carol our notes by mail and then kind of review it again outside of the meeting. And then when we come to the next meeting, maybe we, at that point, review kind of that exum council-ready document and tweak it. Is that doable?
Do we need to send it to staff first, then to send to Carol? Or
Yeah, why don't you go ahead I mean, if you can give them, if you have them today, you can give them to Board Member Hall right here. If you have them online, emailable, send them to Marnie, and Marnie will disseminate them. And we'll send them not only to Board Member Hall, but the whole group, so everyone's getting it at the same time.
And then I think, I don't know, Carol, if you're willing to, kind of work in tandem on the revision and the XM, and then we can, maybe before the next meeting, have the XM in front of the staff so that they can be ready to talk to us about it.
You're saying XM?
Sorry, executive summary, like a one-pager or whatever we're going to send to the council that outlines the thumbnail sketch that Brandon was talking about. What do you think, team, about that? I mean, that's a lot of work on you, Carol. So that's what you're one of the reasons why I'm asking.
So when you say executive summary for the council, so this is too much for them to read, the actual proposal, which will be slightly shorter.
If you're looking at me, I think that they would appreciate seeing whatever draft you have at this point. I think
the full.
It seems like they would go together.
Don't we need I think we need an.
Yeah, that'd be like a cover. It'd be like a cover sheet. Yeah.
Here's the intent. Here's the purpose. Here's the issues, and then maybe even we do outs. These are things that are still in works, and then we have that revised document that if we send all our notes to Carol and she feels comfortable revising the document, we can do that, and then maybe we can get that to staff prior to the next meeting, and we can talk about it in its entirety to include the XM at the next meeting. Does that sound doable?
Yeah, we would, as staff, we would basically just include that. Those would be your attachments for the next meeting, available for the public ahead of the meeting. And ultimately, I would see this cover letter being almost like the ask from the HRB. It would be your, dear City Council, here's our proposal, here's why we think it's great. We kindly request you to give us a thumbs up, thumbs down policy guidance on this. This is something that the city should continue working on.
Okay.
And maybe it needs to be kept, like Brandon's suggesting, a little more general. I mean, I think whatever we produce, possibly at the next meeting, I would think, if it's too specific and I'm just speaking maybe for myself, but there's a lot of things I disagree with. I don't know if I'm comfortable voting to send that to council. If it's if we keep to the general ideas of, the mission statement and outline it for them as, in a more general way, rather than a specific, almost written ordinance, then that probably is more easy for people palatable for people to vote to bring to council.
So you have reservations beyond what you mentioned today?
There's a lot of things I haven't decided on. There's a lot of criteria, eligibility requirements, I think are still difficult to need to be worked through, even in my own mind about it. Because again, these things are difficult.
Yeah, but if we have a chance to look at that before the next meeting, staff's had a chance to look at it before the next meeting, I think we can maybe finish that. And then if she's got our comments, I think there's a lot of pushback against your descriptive elements. For example, we could probably, for the purpose of this next event, we could probably take all those out.
Yeah.
I mean, Appendix A, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I don't have as much pushback as everybody else, but I think it's a good point that, those are, the pictures on there are not necessarily representative of what we want to do. So kill Appendix A.
Yeah.
Agreed. Do some things like that, and then take into, look at Eric's verbiage and see how it melds with your concept and things like that. Maybe you adjust that in that way. And then, like I said, if you can get that to staff and then you can get it, and they can get it out to us prior to the next meeting, we can look at it. We can do the final kind of red penning. If we feel that it's ready to do, and maybe at that point it's still not ready, and then we can get it before council in a condensed matter with that, bottom line up front, kind of a cover sheet.
Okay, so I think I've got everybody else's comments, but not the details of your comments.
I will try to rewrite it to make it a little more clear, Carol.
Okay.
I'll email it to Marnie.
Thank you.
Can review that. The other thing, I don't want to add too much to your plate, but I think it'd be interesting, and maybe this would be a question of council, is really how many homes out there are we talking about that you think might be eligible? I mean, it's almost an interesting exercise for you to take photos of a lot of them.
A lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big job.
Maybe starting with your own home though, and then finding some other houses that you think are representative, assuming that the,
I mean, I'm
Owners
thinking
are-
of just my block. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of houses.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
yeah.
Are you thinking of anything that's newer?
Nothing that's less than 50 years old. Got to meet with my own criteria here.
Okay.
Anyone else have suggestions on how we want to move forward?
Don't think so.
Do we need a vote on this?
We'd appreciate, you know, some sort of, you know, motion direction, you know, if the motion's to continue the item, basically, so continue the item with direction, for Board Member Hall to do certain things and then put it on the next agenda.
Yeah. We have a motion.
I move that we continue Carol Hall's proposal to the next meeting, for discussion then.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks. Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Croman,
Yes?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes,
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
and Board Member Pomeroy.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All
Okay.
right, thank you for all the good comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you for all
Thank
your
you.
hard work.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I mean, since I've been on HRB, no other board members taken some major task like this upon themselves and put as much work, at least as far as I know, as much work into it as you have, Carol. So I appreciate your passion and I appreciate your diligence on this. And I know you've had help from other members of the community, and that's awesome too.
Thank you.
Okay, any other, director's report, please.
Thank you. So we have our next housing ad hoc committee, which is working on the update to our housing element in our general plan. We'll be having a meeting on May 24th at 5:30. So we encourage, you know, everyone to come out either in person or on Zoom to participate. We will be here in the chambers. And we'll be talking about a number of different topics, including potential housing sites and programs for the next 8 years. Also, we are really happy to share that our scanning project is just about complete. If you haven't been on our GIS website, you really should check it out. We also have a new aerial view, which is a very crisp and clear picture of the village. So it looks really great. Access to the property files are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's really been a huge accomplishment for our department, and we have our director to thank for that. Just the process of accessing the files is just so much more convenient and readily available to the public now. So we're really happy to have that done. And then also we've cleared out a lot of filing cabinets in our space. So all of those hard copy files are now safely in storage off-site to be preserved. And I think the next step for us in the scanning project is we do have some plans up at Vista Lobos, lots of rolled plans. And so we want to get those scanned as well, get them up on the GIS, and get them off to an off-site storage facility where they can also be stored and protected for many years to come. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Okay, so future agenda items, our next meeting's on the 19th of June. And our agenda item, this agenda item for level 2 proposal will be on there in addition to whatever else is scheduled for that. I just will say publicly, unfortunately, I will be traveling for the next meeting, which I think is July 17th. So Carol, if I'll ask you to stand in for me, I think it's July 17th. I'm going to be far out of the area.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, and then if there are any other comments from the board? I would say that we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.